All right, welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. It seems like every time we sit down to do one of these deep dives, the markets are doing something interesting.
Always something.
Yeah, always something. So today is March 17th, 2025. And we've got a whole bunch of reports on the stock market and the U.S. economy. And of course, we always got to touch on the crypto world.
Of course.
So yeah, and you're here to kind of make sense of all this data without, getting lost in the weeds.
That's the goal.
And I think we've got the perfect person to do that.
Well, I appreciate that. Happy to try anyway.
I think you will. Okay, so let's jump right in. I guess we'll start with the stock market.
Sounds good.
All right, so the Dow Jones is up today, 0.85%, closing at 41,841.63.
Not bad.
Not bad, right? And then the S&P 500 also looking good, up 0.64% to reach 5,075.12. And even the NASDAQ, the more tech-heavy NASDAQ, managed to a 0.31% gain, ending the day at 17,808.66. So, some analysts are calling this, like a cautious comeback.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I'm seeing a little bit of market whiplash.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is this like a real recovery or just, kind of a blip?
Yeah, I think the term cautious comeback is actually pretty accurate. Because remember, the market, it goes through these cycles, right? We have these periods of uncertainty, and often we see these moments of tentative optimism,
right?
Like we're seeing now. And so, take the S&P 500, for example. It's sort of flirting with that 5,700 resistance level right there. And what that means is that, historically, there's been a level of selling pressure around that price point.
Right.
So if the S&P can break through that, convincingly, that could signal a stronger shift in momentum. I think what's really interesting, though, is that it seems like this upward trend is being driven by a combination of factors. So yes, there is some renewed investor confidence, I think, but we're also seeing some positive economic indicators.
Right, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Exactly, yeah. So it's like this kind of, confluence of things that are, maybe pushing the market upward a little bit.
Right. And looking at some specific companies, Walmart and IBM, they were among the top performers on the Dow today. So what does that kind of tell us about investor sentiment?
Well, yeah, the strong performance of companies like Walmart and IBM, I think it suggests that maybe investors are shifting a little bit more towards what's called value investing. So essentially, they're looking for these more established, well-known companies with solid fundamentals,
right? Often
in sectors that are less sensitive to economic fluctuations.
Makes sense.
So, this could be a sign that, investors are still a little bit cautious about, the overall economic outlook, and they're maybe seeking stability a little bit more right now.
Right. So for everybody listening out there, think about your portfolio. Are you leaning more towards those like growth stocks?
Yeah.
The ones that have, big potential, but also, higher risk, or are you kind of going for the, relative safety of those value stocks? It's something to think about.
It is. It's an interesting question.
Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about the U.S. economy. And it's giving us some, some mixed signals maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
On the one hand, you've got February retail sales. They increased, but only by 0.2%. So,
Not a huge jump.
Yeah, not exactly. That's something to get too excited about, right?
Right.
But then when you look a little deeper, you look at the control group. And that's that core measure that strips out, the more volatile categories like cars and gas. That's actually up a full 1%.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of making some noise on Wall Street. Can you kind of break down what's going on there?
Yeah. So, you're right. The control group is getting a lot of attention. And the reason for that is because it's considered to be a more reliable indicator of the underlying consumer spending trends.
Right.
Because it removes the volatility of those, big ticket items that you mentioned.
Right.
So, a 1% increase in that control group, that suggests that consumer spending, which is, one of the key drivers of the U.S. economy, it remains relatively strong. Oh. And that's really what Wall Street is reacting to, is that, that potential for continued growth, despite, maybe some of the headwinds that are out there.
Right. And speaking of potential headwinds, we have the Fed meeting coming up on March 19th. And, everybody's kind of like on the edge of their seats about, potential interest rate changes. Some economists seem to think that, a rate cut is a sure thing.
Right.
While others are, less convinced. So what's your perspective on that?
Well, the Fed's decision is going to depend on a lot of different factors. Things like inflation, employment data, overall economic growth. These retail sales figures that we've been talking about, those are positive. But, some of the other indicators are less clear cut. So it's really too early to say, with certainty what the Fed is going to do.
Right.
What I find fascinating is just how much weight is given to these announcements. The markets tend to react so dramatically to even the slightest hint of, a change in Fed policy.
Yeah, it's like everyone's holding their breath, just waiting to see what they're going to do. Okay. And speaking of dramatic reactions, we can't forget about the crypto world.
Of course not.
Bitcoin, never one to be left out of the party, decided to throw its own little St. Patrick's Day celebration.
Wow.
By surging above $83,000.
Wow.
And reaching $84,255.4 So almost a 3% jump. You got to love the energy.
Yeah, that's a big jump.
What do you think is driving this latest spike?
Bitcoin's volatility is sort of legendary.
Yeah.
And this latest surge is, a prime example of that.
Right.
If you look at, the fear and greed index,
Right.
which is, this measure of market sentiment.
Right.
It's currently sitting at 22, which indicates a pretty high level of fear in the market.
Okay.
So, despite that fear, Bitcoin bulls, they're still out there pushing the price higher.
Right.
Maybe betting on, increased adoption or, positive news on the regulatory front, or who knows.
So even in a fearful market, there are still people seeing opportunity.
Yeah.
That's crypto for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So Bitcoin's been on this wild ride. Gold, on the other hand, has been holding pretty steady, above $3,000. Silver trading at $106,000 per kilo in Delhi. Why are those precious metals behaving so differently from, Bitcoin in this case?
Well, gold and silver are often seen as what are called safe haven assets. So when there's, uncertainty in the market, investors tend to flock to them,
right, because
they're perceived as being less risky, than more volatile assets like cryptocurrencies.
Right.
And so their stable performance today, I think it suggests that some investors are, hedging their bets a little bit, trying to find that balance between, potential growth and risk mitigation.
Right. Seems like everybody's trying to figure out the best strategy
Yeah.
in this, constantly changing financial landscape.
It's definitely a moving target.
Yeah. So I guess as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious, what are your predictions for the week ahead?
Ooh, predictions.
Yeah, no, I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you think the stock market will continue to climb? Is the Fed going to give us any hints about, their next move? What about Bitcoin? Will it finally break through that $85,000 mark?
Okay, so, the markets, they're constantly evolving. It's impossible to predict the future with any certainty.
Of course.
But what we can do is, stay informed.
Yeah.
Analyze the data.
Right.
And make decisions that align with, our own individual goals and risk tolerance.
That's good advice.
I try.
So this deep dive, it's just kind of giving you all a taste of what's happening in the markets right now. But, this is just the beginning of your exploration.
Yeah, for sure.
Keep learning, keep asking questions.
Yeah.
And, keep an eye on those trends that spark your interest today.
And join us next time for another deep dive.
Exactly. We'll see you then.